I told you before, I'm happy to play golf with you if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie that he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
One of the lowlights, you could say, from last night's debate in which President Biden struggled with almost every answer. His voice hoarse at times. You couldn't really understand what he was saying, as former President Donald Trump made dozens of false or misleading claims. Today, though, the focus really has been on Mr. Biden, who struggled in the testy debate, according to the Washington Post headline, which reports that his performance is stirring worry in the Democratic Party. Well, today, the candidates hit the campaign trail. Former President Trump was in Virginia late this afternoon for a large rally in the city of Chesapeake, that's just south of Norfolk, while President Biden spoke for about 20 minutes at a rally in Raleigh, North Carolina. Even President Biden today acknowledged that it was a bad night for him, saying today, quote, "I don't debate as well as I used to." But what do voters think? This may actually surprise you. A scientific poll released today by YouGov found 43% of viewers thought Trump won the debate last night, 22% thought Biden won, and a whopping 35% said they're not sure. I asked UB political science professor Dr. Jacob Neiheisel about that. Is this being overblown, or is it really a pants on fire, DEFCON 1 panic moment?
I think it's a little bit overblown. I mean, they're going to lose some news cycles, right? The news is really bad for them right now, but we've got a long time to turn the ship around, basically, is what I would be thinking if I were them. Not, 4-alarm fire, pull all the panic buttons kind of thing. I think time is very much in their favor right now.
We're just a little more than 2 weeks away from the start of the GOP convention, 52 days until the Democrats convention, and 130 days until the November election. Joining me live tonight is Democrat Jessica Schuster and Republican Carl Calabrese as we talk about the presidential debate from last night. I appreciate both of you coming on the show, and I want to start with how Republicans sort of seized on Biden's performance last night. This is Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik from here in New York. Listen.
Those first 20 minutes that were just catastrophic for Joe Biden. He's unfit to be commander-in-chief versus the strength of President Trump.
All right, Jessica, let's start with you. How devastating was the performance last night? What do you give of so many Democrats, on the record saying that they're extremely worried about this?
Listen, I think Joe Biden unquestionably underperformed last night. I think he has acknowledged that. I think his campaign team has acknowledged that. But I think it's important to keep in context that while some people may be questioning President Joe Biden's fitness for office after last night, a majority of the American public in 2 consecutive presidential elections have already found Donald Trump to be unfit to serve as president. I hear where people are coming from when they're talking about these things, but I also think that there was a lot to point out that Donald Trump, did not necessarily perform the way that they would have wished either.
So there is a lot more to discuss specifically with President Biden and his performance last night. But Carl, I want to ask you to react to a little bit of the criticism of President Trump as well. This is what Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, had to say.
Joe Biden had a bad debate night, but Donald Trump was a bad president. And I think what you saw last night was a pathological liar in Donald Trump, who lied about his record, who has dangerous ideas about where he wants to take this country.
So, Carl, the fact checkers were quite busy with the former president, but I was surprised to see, despite all the sort of hand-wringing about Biden's performance, only 43% of people in that YouGov poll thought Trump won. Do you think he did a performance well enough that it changed the race in any way last night?
Oh, absolutely, Michael. This was a disaster. There's no way to sugarcoat it. The two men had, each one had a major mission to accomplish. In Donald Trump's case, it was not to look like the Donald Trump of the first debate in 2020, where he was unhinged and ranting and raving and angry. He pretty much did that last night. He was a much more restrained and measured guy for Donald Trump. On the other hand, Joe Biden's mission was to convince people that he has the stamina, the mental acuity to be a president for another term, and he failed miserably last night. In the first 10 minutes of that debate, I said, I don't know how the guy's going to get through 90 minutes of this. It was bad. And not only was it bad politically, but the message it sends to our adversaries overseas of a very weak and feeble president is scary. So I think as these polls come in, I think you're going to see the poll you just cited is going to be the outlier. This was a disastrous performance. It will go down in history as the worst debate performance by an incumbent president since we've been having debates.
Jess, you're a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago this August. You've heard all the chatter from last night and this morning. If last night was just a bad night, perhaps the race just goes on and President Biden is able to do better out on the stump. But what if last night is just who Joe Biden is now, that he has aged to the point where that's who he is? Would you consider changing your vote come the convention, or do you think there's any possibility that we end up with a brokered convention and it's not Joe Biden on the ballot in November?
Listen, the reality is I am a delegate and I'm pledged to the president. So aside from any personal preference, it is illegal for me to actually go to the convention unless the president himself releases his delegates. I think you saw today in North Carolina a president who doubled down on his commitment to running this race, to being in the thick of it. A bad day doesn't make a bad person. And I think he made that comparison quite clear when he talked about Donald Trump's felony convictions today, when he talked about the fact that he understands that he is not the debater he used to be, but he does know right from wrong and he does know truth from lies. I think that Donald Trump's performance last night will remind many Americans, I disagree with Carl, I think the more we let Donald Trump be Donald Trump, the more people remember what 4 years ago was like. Look, our news cycle is fast. You know that, I know that. I think that some of the dust is already starting to settle in Biden land. Now, I'm sure there have been hard conversations. I wouldn't want to have to be in the room with Jen O'Malley Dillon and the rest of Biden's campaign team today. But I think that what we're seeing is a president who is dusting himself off and going to work again like he has gone to work every day for the past 4 years for the American people.
I watched part of the speech today in North Carolina, and it was a different person than what we saw on the debate stage last night. He did have a teleprompter today, but just the energy level was completely different. And Carl, I wonder, moving forward, on Monday, we're going to get the decision from the Supreme Court involving former President Trump. And there is the possibility, the likelihood that the case can move forward in Washington, D.C., the insurrection case. What if we're in a situation in which come October or even November, Donald Trump is on trial facing federal felony charges at the same time that, folks are processing this debate from Joe Biden? I mean, how do you think that impacts the race moving forward?
Michael, there's all kinds of things that are going to happen between now and election that are going to impact this race. I mean, next month he gets sentenced. At one time, I thought that there's no way he would go to jail, but after watching the way this judge conducted this trial, which I think has a really good chance of being overturned on appeal, I don't put it past him to take a major party, a political candidate for president, and sentence him to jail, even if it's for 20 or 30 days. But I want to go back and say this. You can't just say it's a bad night, because the American people have seen Joe Biden's decline now for at least a couple of years. They've seen his stumbles, his slurring. They've watched it. And so what they saw last night was just kind of the culmination of what they have been seeing. So it wasn't just a bad night that you can dismiss and say, oh, just let it go. They've been seeing this and internalizing this now for at least 2 years. I don't want to debate Jessica, but she said, do you remember Donald Trump's, 4 or 5 years ago? Yeah, I do remember it. I remember inflation was 1.9%. I remember gas was $2 a gallon. I remember the border was secure. And so he's got a good record in the major issues now. And the issues I just cited are the main issues of the American people. And one other thing, and that is, 82% of Americans think Joe Biden is too old to be president, including 62% of Democrats. This is a big issue, and last night just supercharged it.
You both represent your sides extremely well. Jessica Schuster, Carl Calabrese. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jessica.
Coming up.